Thank you very much. Thank you, Joshua. Good evening, gentlemen. It's great to be with you. Lots of familiar faces here, some not so familiar, so it's really, really nice to be here with you this evening. I've been asked to speak about a pilgrimage that I led to the Holy Land of Israel and Palestine this time last year, last October 2017. And the whole idea of going to Israel and Palestine on pilgrimage raises all sorts of interesting issues about our faith and about the situation in that area of the world, which is a wonderful area but has incredible problems as well. And people go on pilgrimages for all sorts of reasons. Just looking at some notes here, but here we go. Here we are. That's what I'm looking for. People go on pilgrimages for all sorts of reasons. Some people say they want to go on pilgrimage to the Holy Land to see, what the place was like where Jesus walked, and to try and visualise for themselves the stories that they've heard from the Bible. And of course, it's worth saying right at the outset that it is just about impossible to see the places where Jesus walked, because the ground level within the city of Jerusalem is different from the time when Jesus was there. You can get a feel for what it was like in Jesus' time, because the landscape hasn't changed. And although the ancient buildings that you see may not be the ancient buildings that Jesus saw, they certainly give a flavour of what life was like. The very first time I went to Israel, which was about nearly 30 years ago, somebody's asked me when I came home, what was it like? And I said, it was just like being there when Jesus was there, because there were soldiers in every street corner. So that's part of what happens when you go to Israel and Palestine. You experience a land of deep faith, deep faiths, and also a land of problems, of conflict as well. And that's one of the things that you have to kind of get your head around. The pilgrimage that I led last year was on behalf of Gordon Presbytery, although we had a few other people involved as well. People from Tain in Ross-shire, from Buchan, and one or two others as well. But it was mainly people from Gordon Presbytery, from not too far away. I'm just... right, there we go. Thank you very much. This is the classic scene that you see of Israel, and this is the Dome of the Rock. Just about every pilgrimage that you go on to starts off in Jerusalem will take you to the Mount of Olives, which looks over the old city of Jerusalem. Jerusalem is a bustling city of, I don't know, well over 1 million people, but at its heart lies the old city, which is divided into 4 quarters, and they're just about our quarters. There's the Latin or Roman Catholic quarter, the Armenian quarter, the Jewish quarter, and the Muslim quarter. And on the site of what is believed to be the site of the ancient Jewish temple, there are now 2 buildings. There's first of all the Dome of the Rock, which is not actually a mosque, but is a Muslim shrine that dates to roughly about 700 AD after the Muslim conquest. But in the background you can see there are 2 domes, 2 grey domes, and that is the church of what in English we call the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, but to the Greek-speaking Christians it's the Church of the Resurrection. And when you draw out, just to the left of that is the Al-Aqsa Mosque, and although we didn't go up onto the Temple Mount this time, although you can get access there, non-Muslims aren't now allowed into the Al-Aqsa Mosque or into the Dome of the Rock, but 30 years ago you could get, but things have changed. This is the group of 19 of us who took part in the pilgrimage. Some of you may know from Trinity Church at West Hill, Malcolm Christie, and his wife Anne, and you can see Malcolm's big brother, who's John Christie, who is a former moderator of the General Assembly. Malcolm said to me, I want to come on the pilgrimage, but is it okay if my brother comes? And of course it was, and it was super having John as a fellow minister on the pilgrimage, and he was just, he didn't pull rank at all, but we had a great time. And this is the classic view from the Mount of Olives, where Jesus on the first Palm Sunday rode down, came from Bethany just over the hill behind us, and stopped and looked across to the ancient city of Jerusalem. And although you get the flavour, these are not the walls that Jesus would have seen. He wouldn't certainly have seen the Dome of the Rock or the Al-Aqsa Mosque. This site commemorates the event described in the Gospels, where Jesus wept as he looked over the city because of the fate that he prophetically anticipated for it. And this is the church built on that site, or close to that site, called Dominus Flavit. The Lord wept. And the church, which was built in the 1950s, is supposed to be in the shape of a teardrop. The valley that lies between the Mount of Olives on one side and the Old City on the other is one of the biggest cemeteries that you'll find in the world, because Jewish tradition has it that this is the site that when the Messiah comes, because of course Jews believe that the Messiah is still to come, then he's going to return to the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, and those who are buried on the Mount of Olives, on the slopes of the Mount of Olives, will kind of have grandstand seats for the general resurrection. And I'm told that Robert Maxwell is buried somewhere here, because he was sort of a Jewish background. And one time it was there just after the pension scandal broke out, and I said to our group, this was about 20 years ago, said, anyone here a Mirror Group pensioner? Because if you are, that's where your pension went, to pay for Robert Maxwell's grave on the Mount of Olives. Just round the corner, though, there's a church which is called the Pater Noster Church, which is the church where, again, by tradition, no hard and fast evidence, you won't find a Bible reference to this, but by tradition, Jesus taught his disciples the Lord's Prayer in Jerusalem. And there's a church called the Pater Noster Church, which has a cloister with the words of the Lord's Prayer in just about every known language, including Doric. So it's our Father in heaven, hallowed be thy name. And I had hoped that this was written by my predecessor as Minister of Afford and Keg and Tullinessel, the Reverend Dr. Joyce Colley, who was an expert in the Doric, but and who also led a number of pilgrimages to the Holy Land. But I since discovered it wasn't actually Joyce who did this version of the Lord's Prayer. Just down the hill, at the bottom of the hill, is the Church of All Nations. And it's called that because lots of different countries contributed to its building. It doesn't really give you much clue as to what it's about. There are two things about Church of All Nations. First of all, within the church, there's a rock. And this is the rock which was, 2,000 years ago, within the Garden of Gethsemane. And again, by tradition, you'll hear that little phrase quite a lot, because a lot of these places, there's no hard and fast evidence, but traditions go back a long way. And this is the place where Jesus, by tradition, knelt on the night of his arrest and prayed, Father, forgive them. Just outside the Church of All Nations is the Garden of Gethsemane, which is an olive grove, and some of the olive trees there are very ancient. I'm told they can't quite be 2,000 years old, but perhaps that tree was grown from an olive that came from a tree that Jesus knelt and prayed under. On the other side of the the valley leading up to the old city of Jerusalem. There's a church which is by reputation the place where the high priest's house was, and outside it there is one of the very few places that archaeologists have identified as a staircase which goes back to the time of Jesus, and this would have been the staircase that Jesus was taken after his arrest, crossed on the other side of the valley in the Garden of Gethsemane, taken to the house of Caiaphas, the high priest. And these steps are very likely the steps that Jesus went on. Our pilgrimage was a two-centre pilgrimage. We had half our time in the city of Jerusalem and half our time in Galilee, and we stayed at St Andrew's Scots guest house of the Church of Scotland. The Church of Scotland punches above its weight in Israel and Palestine, and that goes back to the 19th century. We'll see in a little while the presence of the Church of Scotland in Galilee in the town of Tiberias, where a hospital was established to support the Arab community in the Victorian times under Dr. Torrance, and that's the same Torrance as the famous family of theologians. In the city of Jerusalem itself, there is a Church of Scotland which was built as a war memorial after the First World War, when General Allenby conquered Jerusalem, and many Scottish troops were involved in that. Sadly, as you can imagine, many of them were killed, and the church was built as a war memorial to those who were killed during the First World War and thereafter. And that's the outside of the church. This is the archway here is the entrance into the guest house or hotel, and the tower is the tower of the church. And it's a very elegant building. It's very cool. It's got some lovely little design features in it. It's a bijou hotel. Our group of 19 didn't quite fill it, but we were almost filled it. This is our guide and bus driver, Assam on the left and Bassam on the right. And our pilgrimage was organised by McCabe's Pilgrimage. There are lots of different pilgrimage firms who offer deals. I think McCabe's is one of the best, but I would say that. I don't get any commission, I should say, if anyone here wants to book a pilgrimage after my presentation. But McCabe's, although they're based in London, they're actually originally, the McCabe family are Scottish, and Alistair McCabe, who runs the business now, is a Scot. Assam and Bassam are both Arab Christians, and Assam comes from the north, from Galilee, and Bassam is a local. He comes from the Latin Quarter of Jerusalem, and his family have stayed there for many generations. Our first trip outside Jerusalem was through the separation wall that separates Palestine from Israel, and it's a security barrier as far as Israel is concerned, and of course as far as the Arabs are concerned, it's a barrier which stops them from going about their normal business. It sometimes separates them from land that they have owned and have worked for generations. And so all along the Palestinian side, there's all sorts of graffiti. Some of it, I think the one of the guy with his hand raised is by Banksy, the artist. He has a hotel in Bethlehem, and it's got a punning name. It'll come back to me later on, never mind. You'll notice that there's a fist here holding a key. I'll come back to that later on. And nothing is sacred. That's Donald Trump, and he's saying, "I'm going to build you a brother." That's so to get to Bethlehem, which is it's only 5 miles from Jerusalem. You have to go through the wall. For us as pilgrims, that was a formality, but for the thousands and thousands of Palestinians who live in Bethlehem and work in Jerusalem or other parts of Israel, they have to queue up and it can take several hours each way sometimes to get through the wall and then to get back home again. Just outside Bethlehem, there's a series of caves which are known as the Shepherd's Fields, and by tradition, the shepherds used the caves there as shelters while they were watching their flocks by night. And so on our very next day, our second day, we had a visit to Bethlehem, to the Shepherd's Fields, and we celebrated Holy Communion, and the Reverend John Christie celebrated communion for us. And just outside there's a beautiful fountain. There's the shepherd on his fountain with some of the sheep. And it was quite an amazing experience because there are a number of chapels that have been made out of the caves, and of course there's no windows and no glass in the windows because it's so hot, and we could hear the German Christians singing next door, the South African Christians on the other side. We were trying to keep our end up as well, so it's quite an experience. And of course you can imagine that anywhere where people want to go and visit, there are souvenirs. And in fact, the Christian community of Bethlehem was a majority Christian community until the last 20 or 30 years. Many Christians from the West Bank, from Palestine, have left. Not because they've been directly persecuted, although I think they probably feel a bit uncomfortable with the attitude of their fellow Palestinians, also because they perceive that they haven't, because of the way that Israel governs the whole of Israel and Palestine, that their opportunities are limited, and so many of them have left for other countries. But those who stay there are part of a cooperative, and they do beautiful carving out of olive wood. And so if you ever get a souvenir from the Holy Land, the chances are that it is an olive wood carving made by Christians in Bethlehem. Just on the outskirts of Bethlehem, there is the Al-Sharouk School for the Blind, and there's a particular connection here. I first visited this 20 years ago, and they were in the old school, which is pretty ramshackle, and they were just trying to raise funds to build a new school. They've succeeded in doing that. That's the head teacher, and we were shown round, and many of the classrooms had signs like this, kindly donated by the generosity of Kemnay Parish Church in Scotland, in the UK. And many of you who knew the late John Renton, who was minister here at Kemnay before Joshua, will know that John had a very significant awareness and interest in the Holy Land through his work for the Church of Scotland, for the Middle East Committee of the Church of Scotland. But I think that when groups from different churches were visiting, they would make a donation, and so a group from Alan Gregg and Kemnay were there a few years ago. This rather unprepossessing building is one of the centres of the Christian faith, because this is the Church of the Nativity in Bethlehem. And there is building work going on, which is why there's that the sheeting up there. It looks a bit like a fortress, and that's not surprising really, because it's been the centre of attacks over centuries. So it's meant to keep warriors out. But to get in, there's only one door. You can see in the previous one that there actually were more doors. The door used to be higher. In fact, that used to be the door there. But now it's a very low door, and partly that was to stop marauding bandits or cavalrymen riding their horses into the church in the Middle Ages. And the church has made a virtue of this and saying, well, if you're going to visit the birthplace of Jesus, you have to bow down before you even go in. And once you're in the church, you go down into a series of caves, which were commonly used as housing in the time of Jesus. And in what was once a cave, now covered in marble and silver, underneath an altar there's a silver star, which is, by tradition, the place where Jesus was born. one of our members, before we got to our group, told me that her mother, who had recently died, and that she'd been going through her mother's papers and come across the words of a Christmas carol that her mother had written, that goes to a tune by John Rutter, I think just by coincidence. And I said, when we get to Bethlehem, we'll sing your mother's carol at the Church of the Nativity. Because of the building work going on, we couldn't do it inside, but I thought we'll do it outside, so we found a little quiet corner, and just as we started singing, the call to prayer from the mosque came over the loudspeakers. Because everywhere there's a church, the Muslim community have built a mosque. The road that goes down from Jerusalem, not far from Bethlehem, takes you through the Judean desert, which is one of the most desolate areas in the world. It's where the Good Samaritan was travelling when he came across the man who'd been attacked by thieves. At the bottom of the road, you come to the area of Qumran, which was a community of a group called the Essenes, who were somewhere out on their own, really, about the time of Jesus. It's thought that John the Baptist might have been a member of the group of Essenes. When their community was at risk of being destroyed by the Romans, they took all their sacred writings and hid them in caves like this. And in 1947, many of you will know the story, a Bedouin boy was looking for a lost sheep. He thought it might be in that cave there, so it was too high up to climb up. It would be a huge amount of effort, so he threw a stone up into the cave. Instead of hearing the bleating of a goat that had been hit by a stone, he heard the breaking of pottery. And he recognised that's what it was. So he did climb up to the cave, and there he found lots of clay jars filled with scrolls, ancient scrolls. And these are the Dead Sea Scrolls, which include the oldest manuscripts of the Old Testament ever found, 1,000 years older than the oldest ones we had before, and yet, although there are some alterations and changing in the copying over 1,000 years, the meaning and the sense has not changed at all. And that's Bassam again, our guide. Just down the road, along the shores of the Red Sea, you can visit Masada, which has got no significance for Christians, but it's such an amazing place to visit. This is a model of this rock, which was made into a palace by King Herod on all sorts of different levels. 30 years after Jesus, it was taken over by a group of Jewish rebels. The Romans weren't very happy about that, so they came to get rid of them, and they built camps. You can just about see there. You can still see the nearly 2,000-year-old Roman campsites dotted round about. The Jews thought they were safe. They had their wives and children there as well. They thought they were safe. They could sit it out. But the Romans, being brilliant engineers, built a ramp up the easiest side, the other side of the mound, and eventually managed to break in. The Jews, anticipating this, decided that rather than surrender and whatever fate would await them if they did, they committed mass suicide. And Masada has come to be emblematic of Jewish resistance, to the extent that the elite Israeli Defence Force troops come to Masada to make their oath of allegiance to the state when they finish their training. That's the Dead Sea in the background, by the way. It's just completely desolate. And this is some of our group in the synagogue that was built in Masada. The occupying Jewish forces who turfed out Herod's people built a synagogue there as well. And of course, when you go down to the Dead Sea, it's one of the most amazing things in the world to bathe in the Dead Sea. You float. You can't swim. It's impossible to swim. It's not terribly comfortable. And that's two of our group at the Church of Scotland Hotel, looking across to the southeast corner of the ancient walled city. This is our group outside the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. We saw that from right at the start. We saw the grey domes of that, and this is, by tradition, the place where Jesus was buried. And inside, it's not terribly clear. This grey shape here is the space where the tomb of Jesus was. There's no rock to be seen. It's all been encased in marble, but that's where Jesus is, by was tradition, buried. We couldn't get in. It was so busy in the middle of the day when we went, but we went back later on to see it. There are two sites in Jerusalem that are suggested as being the sites where Jesus was buried. The Church of the Holy Sepulchre, although it's a kind of medieval church with all the artefacts that go along with that, that's looking into the tomb there, and see there's all these icons and lamps and candles and marble, and which wasn't there when Jesus was buried. General Gordon, as in Gordon of Khartoum, was staying in Jerusalem. He looked out of a friend's window across to an old quarry and thought, that looks like, those caves look like eyes. The area in between looks like the features of a nose on a skull. And so he suggested that this actually might be the site of Golgotha, the place of the skull. And they started doing excavating, and they found a tomb. And they thought this might be the tomb where Jesus was laid. And of course, later on, archaeologists have done research and discovered that tomb is just 100 or so years after Jesus, but it certainly gives you a feel for what it would have been like, more than the one in the tomb in the Holy Sepulchre. This is the Damascus Gate, and this is where Paul would have set off from Jerusalem, breathing threats against the new Jewish community, except he wouldn't have gone out that gate, because that's the gate of Suleiman the Magnificent from the 15th century, where that tree is down there, down the steps. You can't quite see. There's an old Roman archway, and that would have been the gate that Paul left through. Because we couldn't get into the tomb of Jesus because it was so busy on our regular visit, on the Sunday morning we got up very early, and as I went with a group of 4 of our party, not everyone decided to get up, so I think we had to get up at 5 o'clock to get there. It's about a half-hour walk through the old city, and I was very conscious that it was early in the morning, while it was still dark. A group of women were going to the tomb. And that rang some bells with me in the account of John's Gospel. And so it was a privilege to accompany this group of women. And we arrived just as the Roman Catholic Church at the front and the Coptic Church at the back were beginning their services. And we managed to queue up for an hour or so and get inside to see whatever there was. After that, we went back to the Church of Scotland, this beautiful white marble, and the service there was an international service as well. There are people from many different countries, including Messianic Jews who worship in the Church of Scotland in Jerusalem. The chairs, every chair was donated, because it was built as a war memorial, every chair was donated by a different parish in Scotland. I couldn't find one for Afford, and I couldn't find one for Kemnay. But on a previous occasion, the Reverend Albert Smith managed to sit in Methlick. And he was the Minister of Methlick at the time, so where are we going now? And that's you can see this is the war memorial aspect of the church there. You can't go to Jerusalem and not visit the Wailing Wall. And just to reorientate you can see the Dome of the Rock. Here's the Al-Aqsa Mosque here in the bottom right-hand corner of the Temple Mount. And the Wailing Wall, or the Western Wall, is the only part of not of the temple itself, but of the stonework that supported the huge platform the temple was built on. And that gives you an idea of the scale of the place here. You can see at the bottom, this is the men's section, these Jewish men saying their prayers. And you can see the soldier's got his rifle on his back. And you can see that faithful Jews will write their prayers out and they push them into the cracks. And every so often, every few months, the rabbis will come along and very reverentially they'll take the prayers out of the cracks. I'm not quite sure what they do with them then. It's like being in Jerusalem in the time of Jesus, because there are soldiers in every street corner. These are girls about younger than my daughter. And they don't have their arms on them just now, but you'd be at a checkpoint and there would be a girl who looked as if she could be 17 or probably 18 with an Uzi on the checkpoint control, but here they are just drinking their coffee and having some fun. I said that the Church of Scotland has a presence in Israel and Palestine in Jerusalem, and the St Andrew's Church. It also has a presence on the coast at Jaffa, at Tabitha School, founded in 1863. And we took the opportunity to visit that school. It's one of the few, if not the only schools in Israel where Jewish, Christian and Muslim children are taught together under the one roof. And that makes it very special. The teacher, Mrs. MacDonald on the right there, welcomed us, and she said, you're from the northeast of Scotland. One of our teachers is from Aberdeen, our MPS teacher. I'll go and get her. And so I have to confess I've forgotten her name. That's her on the left, and that's my wife on the right. And as this lady, no, it won't come, came into the room, my wife looked at her. I'm not sure if she looked at my wife. My wife went up to her quietly and said, "You used to do the music festival in Aberdeen when you were a girl," and they'd taken part in the music competition. But not only that, many of you here will know Patricia Finlay. That's Patricia's bridesmaid. So it's a small place, the Holy Land. This is Caesarea Philippi. I'm going to Nazareth now, and this is the Nazareth village, which has been set up by the YMCA, and it's trying to recreate what a village would have been like in the time of Jesus. And our guide here is showing us this scoop out of the rock here is an olive press that's been excavated. Long after they actually allocated this as the space for their recreated village, they discovered an olive press from the time of Jesus. And because it's on the road to the well, it's practically inevitable that Jesus would have walked past it. And they've recreated a little farm and an olive press, a weaver's house, a joiner's house, and a synagogue. When you go into Nazareth itself, you find the great Basilica of the Annunciation, which commemorates the visit of the angel to Mary. And again, more caves. Again, if you've got a cave, why wouldn't you use that for a house? It saves you an awful lot of work. And again, archaeologists have established that the caves underneath the church were in use for housing in the early 1st century, and by tradition, this is where this is the house of Mary and her parents. on the wall outside Bethlehem, there was a fist holding a key. And this is in Nazareth. Old Nazareth is a Christian and Muslim city. There's a new Nazareth, which is a Jewish city. These are the Palestinian colours and another key. In 1948, when 47, when the Jewish state was established and the Israeli state was established and attacked, hundreds of thousands of Palestinians were forced to leave their houses. They locked their doors and took their keys with them. And they still have their keys. And that's, for them, that's the symbol that at some point they hope to return. Whether they ever will is another matter. Not far from Nazareth is Cana, as in Cana of Galilee. There's a not very old church there, but because it has this association, many couples go there to renew their marriage vows. It just so happened that this group of Vietnamese Christians had come to renew their wedding vows. And the ladies, with their beautiful dresses and their flowers, look absolutely radiant, and the men look just slightly sheepish. And who knew that men in Vietnam wear red fezzes for their Sunday best? You can't go to Galilee and not go to the Sea of Galilee. And there are these old boats where they take you out into the water. They cut the engines, and a member of the group reads the passage about the stilling of the storm. They've got a shrewd eye to business, though, because whichever group they've got, as well as the Israeli flag, they'll fly the flag of the group, the nationality that you are. Not only that, they'll play your national anthem. We got Scotland the Brave. And when we got off the boat at the next jetty, there was another group of pilgrims waiting to get on, steady flow. And I walked past the person at the top of the queue and thought, that guy looks familiar. And I walked on down. I thought, dash it, no, I'll turn back. I couldn't think of a name because I'm not good with names, but I went up to this chap and said, excuse me, are you Belgian? And he got a shock because he was. And I couldn't remember his name, but 30 years ago, when I first went on a pilgrimage to the Holy Land, he was a tour guide. And he was still doing tour guiding 30 years later. He hadn't changed that much in 30 years. Capernaum. We think of Jesus in Jerusalem, we think of him in Nazareth, we think of him in Bethlehem, but the town where he probably spent most years as an adult was Capernaum. And they get their priorities right there. Dogs, cigarettes, and then guns. And short clothing. And underneath a special cover here is the house, which may well be the, how are we doing? You look here, yeah, I'll be very quick. The house that's described as the house of Peter, where Jesus healed Peter's mother-in-law. Just up the road is the Mount of the Beatitudes, where Jesus gave the Sermon on the Mount. One of our group, Marilyn, was desperate to come to this church because she had a neighbour when she lived in Aberdeen called Hani, who was a Palestinian Christian from Nazareth, who had worked on the church, and he had built those gates. And so she was thrilled to get her photograph taken there. We finished off our service with our pilgrimage with a service of Holy Communion by the Sea of Galilee. And things are different in Israel, in the Holy Land, because the little chapel was an open-air site. We made a circle round the stone communion table. Bassam, our Roman Catholic guide, joined the circle. I wasn't actually looking at him. I don't know if he took communion. But something was going on in the background. A couple walked along the footpath at the back, and they stopped and looked at us having our service of Holy Communion. The man got fed up and he walked on. The woman stayed. Bassam, our guide, caught her eye, and she caught my eye. And I welcomed her into the circle. And she was part of our service as well. I spoke to her for 2 minutes afterwards and found out that her name was Gabrielle. Why they stopped in the first place, why she stayed when her boyfriend or husband went on, why she accepted the invitation to join our circle, I don't suppose I'll know this side of heaven. But things like that can happen in the Holy Land. Thank you very much.